I managed to die in the new exploration mode, but mostly because I opened my equipment page and got distracted by something, and there was a wandering sluggable that just kept getting closer and closer that I didn't know was there.
Over like 5 minutes, like the bulldozer scene in Austin Powers.
Yeah.
Butterscotch Shenanigans. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 521 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm
Yeah.
And this is the show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's May 16th, 2020 vibes. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be a lot of profanity in this show, just a voluminous amount. So buckle up for that. We'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep the podcast going. So today we got some somewhat quick news items. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're working on for patch 1.2, for Crashlands 2, and then think about starting to answer a question.
We'll do it.
Listener.
I believe we can do it today. We can do it.
We can do it.
All right. So try to get through some of these news items.
Burn it through.
All right. We are Steam Deck verified. Hell yeah. We talked about this 2 podcasts ago. It's been a real struggle. What we kind of figured out was we can take our game on Steam and put it on a branch and just keep that branch locked in and only make the changes that Valve requests for Steam Deck verification on that branch.
Which is not public, by the way.
Which is not a public branch. No player can access it. And whenever we need a review for Steam Deck, we send them that branch, and then they review it. And then if they're like, this queue is slightly too small or something, then we will increase the size of it and resubmit. And we just keep doing that. Now we are pulling a lot of those changes back into the normal branch.
The ones that are good, you know.
Yeah, but like as we talked about in our rant episode about this, some of the changes that they requested of us were changes that actually broke the game for some players.
Yeah, well, one in particular, which it was like basically don't support keyboard and mouse in essence.
Yeah. So we've got everything fixed back up again for players. So it's now working as we intend it to on the live version. And then we just had this branched version that we just got sent off to Valve and everything's good. And they're like, yep, looks good, which just kind of demonstrates the goofiness of this bureaucratic red tape, right? Which is like we could have never merged their requested changes into the player facing branch.
It's even better.
And we would still be deck verified.
Yeah, you could basically have a completely private version that's deck verified, and then there's no way for them to track or trace, if you're pushing that branch to the public or even rolling in whatever changes you did, because that's like a code change, right, to future releases. So why are we doing this?
Even if they could, they're not doing reviews after that first review. Correct. So you could completely break Steam Deck support later on in the game's life cycle.
And just be verified.
You'd still be verified. So
yeah.
So again, silly.
So tis a silly place, but we're through it.
It's silly, but I do like it a lot. I like it a lot better than what everybody else is doing.
Well, the rest of them are silly, but fully gating. Once we realized you could branch it and deal with the silliness not just on a branch, it kind of does away with a lot of the issues, right? Because you could just, we can keep on doing whatever we want.
Because it's like tedious and annoying, but it's not like because for a while we had basically a broken build pushed where you just couldn't use a keyboard and mouse. And once we realized, we're like, wait a second, we could just have this as a branch. Then we unbroke the main build so that players could actually experience it as intended, while we figured out what was going on with it. But there is something useful about a process where somebody at a platform scopes out the thing that you're submitting to the platform to identify issues and all that kind of that actually is useful, because they did find some stuff that was that made it so that the game is better on Steam Deck than it was before, right? That's true. And it's good to have something like that to try to normalize experiences a bit, catch things that developers aren't catching and that kind of stuff. But once we realized how to do it so that it wasn't a heavy-handed process, then it was good. Because the other thing that a thing like this does is it's kind of like how we joke about how players don't read anything, right?
Great.
Developers also don't read anything, right? When we're like
nobody reads it.
Documentation and trying to figure out.
But think about it, whenever you buy something, and nobody reads it. When you buy a piece of furniture from IKEA or something, they're like, put it together with these. People are like, fuck it, I'm just going to start building it, and you're like, please don't. You can do.
I got a new electric kettle this week. and it came with a user manual, and I looked at it and I was like, what the hell is this?
What do you expect?
Turn it on?
A page is like literally 3 paragraphs or something probably about what to do.
I didn't even crack it open. I was just like, you know what? If I can't figure out this kettle, but just based on the fact that it's an electric kettle,
just
and that
by
I'm 38 years old,
everything about the electrical engineering aspects of this, which is crazy.
It's got some buttons on the handle. That's it. That's the whole thing. And they have words on them, and I can read those. I do read the words on the buttons at least.
That's about as far as anybody goes.
That's as far as I'm going.
Yeah, because it was true that for Steam Deck, we basically got Steam Decks, put the game on it, and then tried to figure out what was bad, and then we made those things not bad, and that was how we approached Steam Deck, right? And so we didn't go through like what is the Steam checklist of like all the whatever, right? We just like made it good.
We just made it good,
and that was our whole strategy. And so if your strategy is like make it good but not follow like the checklist, right? Then you're gonna miss some stuff, and some of that stuff isn't gonna matter actually, especially if you're on more
marginal value,
more absurdist platforms like literally the rest of them, but at least you know what the rules are, and so having something where someone was just like, hey, here's the rules, you failed, and we didn't have to figure that out is actually kind of helpful.
Well, and it helps us to understand what their interpretation of the rules are, because sometimes it wasn't really what was written.
Oh yeah, I think all that's true, but I think the reality that the verification both happens one time only, can happen completely on a private branch, means that the verification itself
kind of undercuts.
I have the opposite interpretation, which is to me this is about good faith versus bad faith, right? Because if Steam is like, hey, it could take some effort to get through this, so we want to make sure you can do it like and not have to publish things live while you're trying to get through the process, right? And once you make it so that you've completed the checklist, we're going to trust that you're going to keep doing that.
You'll maintain that.
Yeah. So to me, that's actually a good faith kind of gatekeeping versus say like the App Store, where no matter how many times you've published the same game, no matter how popular it is, no matter anything, no matter how many times you've gone through the review process and not been hung up, right? We've gone years at a time with like not getting dinged by something, right? Only to have the next build be some rando to look at something where the guidelines haven't changed and we haven't changed it. And then they fail it, right? Because they do the same. Because they're taking everything in bad faith. Basically, they're saying like, we don't trust you in the tiniest bit, so we have to double check every fucking thing you do, right? So to me, actually, the Steam, it was annoying to deal with, and I think that's why it's like clouded my sort of emotional reaction to it, right? I think practically it actually is. It's actually a good thing.
Well, no, I think
or at least not a bad thing.
I would say practically the reality still remains that the verification symbol doesn't mean anything.
Oh yeah, that's bullshit. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's what I'm getting at, which is like, again, it's like, it's not bad to have a platform be like, hey, you should fix these things because it'll make the player experience better. It's not even bad for that to have like a review process with some hard gates. And to your point, like being able to do it on a branch is the way to do it if you're going to do it at all. But then if you're not checking anything downstream ever, and also if the rules are so wobbly, they're like Oblivion.
I just stand by. Let the players vote. Like let the players give it a thumbs up, thumbs down on whether it runs well on.
Which is how the rest of Steam works, right? So I think that is what makes that's what makes sense. That's what it should.
And like it would be fine if as a developer we could say don't let players play this on Steam Deck because we haven't actually
if we know it's going to be bad, then
because then that would prevent players from giving it a huge overwhelmingly negative or whatever because they try to play it. It wasn't meant to be played there.
Now that you say that, I don't think you can opt out of Steam Deck.
Well, presumably if you said if you're unsupported, right?
No, as in like they can block you from Steam Deck once they test you and say you're unsupported. But I don't think we can just say like, oh yeah, this doesn't work on Steam Deck.
I don't think we can say. Yeah, it's weirdly out of our hands in some cases. But anyways, we got to keep going. We got lots of news items. Okay, so next thing, Levelhead hit its 5-year anniversary recently, which is super cool. I think we mentioned that a couple episodes ago. But in celebration of that, the Levelhead community made a mini campaign for the 5-year anniversary, and they made like a trailer and all kinds of stuff. I think we're gonna put like a blog post about it.
Yeah, I got a blog post, so that'll be so Sampy will put that in the show notes, so you can check that out. See a bit of a playthrough of it, see the trailer for it, and then go grab it because it's got got a link to the playlist of all the levels that make up that campaign, so you can.
It continues to inspire. They're just vibing.
Just amazing. Just amazing. So otherwise, the plushies, the Flux plushes that we've been talking about that we're doing a limited run of for the past, 4 weeks or something like that. We hit our target. We had to have 200 orders before it would actually ship, and we hit 250. So
yeah, it's great.
So the hunger for plushes has been satiated, and the universe is in balance once more.
Yes.
So super cool. Thanks to everybody who went and ordered those. I say thanks because we do get a tiny kickback from it, but mostly we just really wanted to have the plushies.
Yeah. The actual share of it we get is very, very small unless I think it's if you sell 400 or 1,000 units, then then you actually end up making probably some money off it.
Cut or something.
Yeah. It's all economies of scale stuff. Yeah. We're essentially the ones that we bought for our team. We probably won't fully pay for with the revenue we get.
The kickback from the rest.
I think it'll be pretty close. It'll be on the order, so it kind of made it.
So it's kind of it's a break even for us, just about. So,
well, I think this is what we've always seen this with merch. Anytime we've ever done it, is we would be so lucky if we broke even. All we ever did was lose money. It's so. We did merch because it was fun to do merch and it was fun to have those tangible things. And we wanted those things, but you can't just have one. You can't just buy one merch thing because nobody will sell it to you. If they did, it's going to be $5,000 for that one thing, And so we basically kind of subsidize our own desire to have merch for our games by
letting other people participate.
Everybody else, at the same time, so that the net effect is that it just costs us a bunch instead of an infinite amount, to get our stuff.
So very excited about that, and I hope everybody enjoys your plushes. I mean, the prototype that we got was fucking sick, and so I'm hoping that the final product has that same,
that's gregreat.
Level.
Yeah, I'm also curious if we did another one, once this one is through and we got on the other side of it, if we were able to do a fat fish or something else.
Slugabon plush.
Yeah. Because the other thing is I don't know where all the orders came from, right? So because we're already, the way a game launch works is a jillion people play it the first few days and then you're deep in the tail instantly, right? And so we're already there because that's how game launches work. And so I don't know if we were to put another one up, would people see it?
It's like if we did if we did a sale, if we do a summer sale or whatever else, you'd have to kind of pair.
Pair it with.
You just need a lot of eyeballs, right? Yeah, so you have to pair it with something like that.
Yeah, because what I don't know is if the Steam posts on top of all the traffic that we were getting on the game, because that was a week after basically we did the launch when we put this up. Was that the dominant driver, or was it the podcast and the Discord and our newsletter? Because those are stable, and we don't have to worry about are we launching a game right now?
Huqiao, our social media team in China doing their thing.
Yep, paired with the other stuff. Right?
We simply don't know.
Yeah, we don't know where.
I could ask them. We could ask them for I assume they can give us kind of a breakdown of regional.
Yeah, whatever info
where stuff is shipping to, basically. Yeah. Maybe we could answer some of those questions. That'd be curious.
Yeah. So that's super cool. And then kind of the last little news item before we talk about Crashlands patch 1.2 is we've been invited to partner with an upcoming indie game launch called Tinkerlands, and they're launching into early access on May 23rd. And they asked us if we'd like to do a bundle with them with Crashlands 2 for their launch. And we were like, why not?
Hell yeah. It's by Hype Train, is the publisher, and they have a lot of good indie titles that they. So it seems like a good publisher. The game looks cool. We don't know the development team for that one, but it looks like it's launching into early access. It's a fun crafting.
It's like a top-down crafty survival thing. So I think it's one of those things where this is increasingly common because Steam's been sort of opening up all of these tools for people. So last couple of years, you can basically make a bundle with anybody nowadays, right?
Yeah, so these cross-publisher bundles.
Yeah, and so we've seen these popping off a little bit, but we've done a few here and there, but not one around a game's launch window. So mostly curious to see kind of how that pans out. But the game, it looks like the sort of game that if you like Crashlands, you probably would like it. You know what I mean? It's like a crafty survival thing.
It's a goofy, cartoony, open world kind of game.
But also, but it's not story based, and so it's because when they reached out to ask do we want to be this bundle, I was like, I mean, yeah, let's why not, right? It'll be fun. So there's also this kind of means that this is the first time Crashlands 2 will be on sale because bundles are on sale if you get the whole bundle, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a pseudo sale kind of, right? But we were like, why? I was really curious why they reached out to us because there's a lot of overlap in the games. But there are lots of other indie games out there that are like very similar to what Tinkerlands is in terms of like being much more right. And then I was like, actually, that's probably the reason, right? Because you don't want a literal direct competitor to your game in a bundle.
We'll be like, here's two games that are very, very similar.
You want something that is like got the same vibe and all of that, but is still significantly different in
it's where
obvious ways.
It's where someone who bought the other one would be like, I would pick that up too and get something else out of it. Not the exact same experience, right?
Yeah, which isn't to say that Tinkerlands is like the same as other games that are out there. It's just the degree of obvious difference when you're looking at stuff, right? Is probably you need that to hit something. You need it to like find some magic window where it's not too the same and not too different, right?
Because we've been finding an audience thing. That's how it all works.
Exactly. Yeah. Because we've been asked to be in bundles for stuff where I'm like, there's no overlap in audience here. What are you trying to accomplish here? You know?
Yeah. So that's coming, like I said, May 23rd. So, if you haven't picked up Crashlands 2 yet, then, which I think that's like the day after this episode airs or something like that. So if you haven't picked up Crashlands 2 yet, but you're waiting for a sale and you want to get another cool indie game on top of it, then hey, there's your chance.
And the net cost will be higher because it's 2 games, right? But
you got 2 games.
It's a completion bundle too, right? So if you
so if you already have Crashlands 2, then you can get Tinkerlands on sale. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you're welcome, for that if you do that.
Yeah, if you want Tinkerlands a little cheaper than it otherwise would be.
All right. So speaking of sales, okay. So the Steam Summer Sale is coming up. In June?
End of June.
So our target for patch 1.2 is we want to try to get it out before the Steam Summer Sale. We're not hard committing to any dates because we never do until we know what's happening. But the idea here is with the stuff that we're cooking up for patch 1.2, if we can get it into the game before we get another influx of players, that's just good. That's just good for the game, right? So we're aiming for that. And so we kind of talked in the past about like some of the stuff we're working on for patch 1.2, where we want to fill out the Aqua Dunes, like fill out the last third of the game and get some like more stuff into the ecosystem. We want to get some more like base building stuff in there. Get some more pets into the game. So I'm not going to go into specifics about those things just yet. But I do want to get into specifics about mutators.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what we covered was like the original Crashlands, post-launch. And again, I think what's interesting is when we launched Crashlands 2, I think we were still thinking about it in terms of where Crashlands 1 was at its launch and then doing post-launch stuff later, right?
Yeah.
Which is sort of like, as we talked about, kind of a misstep on like the whole sequel thing since people.
Well, it was a 2-parter. I think it was that, and we thought that Crashlands 2, like all the design changes that we made it so a lot of that stuff that we added to Crashlands 1, because Crashlands 1 we added most of the other stuff because Crashlands 1 needed it to like fully stand up, right? And Crashlands 2, we were like, no, we think all these design changes make it so that it doesn't need all of that stuff, right. And so then it was kind of like, and and we were like, oh, these are things that could also be added later if people want them.
Right. It felt fully complete, and then also like, okay, yeah, there's stuff you can do post launch, right? That you can hold off on the same way that we did for the first one. So,
which wasn't to say it's not like we had time to do it before the launch. We were just like we launched when
you picked the launch date. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we could have delayed to do it, right? But we couldn't have gotten it in there before the
correct.
Yeah. So I think the goal with kind of where we go with modes, mutators, whatever else, is to say, okay, these are for people who have played the game now, right? You already played the game, but you want to keep living in the world, you want to keep enjoying this particular game, but how do we return some of, either return to that experience, but with a different lens on it, so it feels very different, or how do we, in some ways, like try to get as close to solving that problem of when you play a really good game, you really love it. You go to play it again, and because you know everything, then you can't be surprised. We've talked about this just developing the game, right? It's like a game that's so much about like exploration and about surprises and just like all the novelty of like the weird stuff you pick up. When you know exactly where everything is, you know exactly where all the drops are going to be. It's hard to play it again, even on like the same difficulty, right? Let's say you don't want to scale up your difficulty, but you do want to keep living in the world. Can we provide some mechanism by which a player could kind of reapproach that? And so we've got one is a return from the original game, which is hardcore mode, which that's cooking up. And so, and then the second one, which we'll get into, is scramble mode. So let's talk about hardcore first. What are we doing with hardcore? Because that's like the thing people have done in the past.
Right. So hardcore mode is pretty similar to what you probably would expect in other, like how it works in other games, right? Which is it's a YOLO mode, right? You only live once. Mm-hmm. You get as far as you can in the game until you die, and then your run is over. One of the things we're doing in Crashlands 2 is we don't want it to be the case that you just like kicked out of your save and you just can't play anymore, because if you happen to have like a good run or like a really cool base or whatever, then just suddenly like losing access to that is pretty discouraging towards those parts of the game, like base building and stuff like that. So we're not kicking you out, but we basically say like up until you die, you're earning hardcore points, basically, where as you sort of go through these completionist types of things, like you find gems, you find like anytime you acquire special items for the first time, as you sort of like hit these important moments as you play through the game, both in terms of like exploration, crafting, beating bosses, whatever, you get points for these things. And once you die, your hardcore run is done in the sense that you stop accruing points. So it's like how far can you get? Locked in, right? So you have a score, and so we're putting together essentially like not a global leaderboard across all players, but just your own personal scoreboard to show where you have like your best hardcore runs. It's basically just like a screenshotable thing that you can share with people and stuff. And so then in hardcore mode, you can't change the difficulty, but the difficulty that you select at the start of your run determines a score multiplier. So if you're playing on harder difficulties, you just get more points, right? So like if somebody plays on challenge mode and 100%'s the game, and then somebody else plays on legend mode and they only get to the end of the first act, the challenge mode person will have a higher score. Yeah. So it's basically a doubling per difficulty tier. So it's like if you get past the halfway mark in legend mode,
you'll beat anybody who's in challenge mode, basically.
Then even if somebody 100%'s the game in challenge mode, you'll still have more points than them. So we're doing that, and then we're also doing like a few little adjustments to hardcore mode to kind of
make it a little more hardcore,
to kind of make things a little bit less cheesable. So things like people will do stuff like if they're taking a bunch of damage, then they'll just open their map and they'll just teleport away, and now they're just perfectly safe. So you always have this get out of jail free button that you're just never actually in danger as long as you anticipate what's happening. And so we're just going to make a little thing where it's like, if you've taken damage in the past few seconds, you can't teleport. So if you're dying of poison, well, shouldn't have done that. You can't get out of this one. So that's like, well, we literally just got the first sort of version of hardcore up and running yesterday. And I played through it a bunch last night. I did 3 runs, and it's already working. Don't even have the scoreboard yet. Just have like kind of the point system and all that stuff. So that's super cool.
A little more tense. So that's on the like. I want to return to this world, and I want to I want to see how I want to test my chops against everything. Because not dying in Crashlands 2, frankly,
it's pretty hard,
adventure mode is a feat. I die constantly.
I managed to die in the new exploration mode, but mostly because I opened my equipment page and got distracted by something, and there was a wandering sluggable that just kept getting closer and closer that I didn't know was there.
Over like 5 minutes, like the bulldozer scene and awesome powers.
Exactly. And then eventually, like it was like literally when I came back to like start playing again, because I just like sit down to make coffee or something, And when I came back to play it again was when the sluggable was getting me, and I was like, no, trying to like get out of the menu as fast as I could, and I just couldn't quite make it. So it is possible to die in the new exploration mode, which is the easiest mode.
Oh yeah.
And I do think we're probably going to also make it because normally when you're in your equipment page in Crashlands 2, then the game slows down to something like 20% of normal speed. So you can, normally you can swap equipment around mid combat, and some people even do that where they pop that open, change their loadout, and
min-maxing these things. Nonsense, right?
So in hardcore mode, we're probably going to make it so that time does not slow down in your equipment page. So you can still swap equipment during combat, but
you're going to have to be fast.
You're going to have to be pretty quick about it, or you're dead.
Yep.
So we're doing a few of those things to kind of de-cheesify it on hard, because we don't really give a shit if you're doing that on a normal run. But if there's a score involved, you want to make sure that the score is legit,
man. Yeah.
So, but the thing about hardcore mode is lots of games have hardcore mode.
Yeah.
It's pretty formulaic, right? Like it's you die and you get a score and then it's done, and we all know what hardcore is. It's fun, but it's pretty cookie cutter, right? So,
but it's also the same kind of fun every time.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know exactly what's coming. It's the same problem we were talking about before. So how do I re-experience this game that I love? in a way that somehow is different.
So this is where the scramble mutator comes in. All right, so this is pretty fucking cool. Been working on this for the past week, and it's in. Like we're playing with it. And my hardcore runs last night were scramble hardcore runs. All right, so here's the deal.
So the mutators are check boxes. So you can check both these boxes, hardcore and scramble at the same time. Okay, and then go ahead. Tell us what's in scramble. What's the deal?
So the way scramble mode works is when you're starting a new save, you can choose whether that save is going to be a scramble run. A scramble run takes the items in the game, like the trinkets, gadgets, bombs, traps. So these are like the equipment items, scrambles them around. So you may have like late game trinkets or gadgets suddenly appear as like there's a fish that you can fish up late game. It's like a part of the arbiter. It's part of the void set. It's a trinket. You may get that late game fish as a craftable item.
Crafted out of pop bar. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. And then instead of where that fish was, and it's not a swap. It's not like the fish trades place with the level 1 item. It's something else from somewhere else in the game takes place of that fish. It's all scrambled around.
You just don't know what the fuck's coming.
So you have no fucking idea what's coming. And also when you're looking at your compendium, so the compendium under normal gameplay has the silhouettes of all the different items, and it shows you the rough order that you'll get them. So in scramble mode, they do have their orders reshuffled. So you'll be able to kind of tell if you've missed something, but their silhouettes are masked, so you can't actually tell what it is that you've missed.
No cheese.
So this will be stuff like, you'll be fishing in the mantle, and instead of finding the splatter boops, you'll fish up a hex ejector or something like that, which normally is something you would craft in the late act 2.
I think my favorite funny twist that Seth got was the volt slugs, which are just basically a little electric bomb that you can fish up in the mantle, had gotten swapped with the Giga Blaster, which is the end game bomb. So Seth was just fishing.
So I'm fishing up nukes out of the water in Marla's mantle, and like these things all scale relative to the player. So it's not like I'm fully one-shotting everything with these. I mean, I was because there was a bug, but it's fixed now. So what that means is like if you do a scramble run, then you may go to it's like there's a spot in the world in Act 1 where there's like a gadget, the molten cesta. You can just go find it and pick it up. Well, in Scramble, you don't know, like something is there, but it's probably not the molten cesta. There's like an infinitesimally small chance that it remains the molten cesta.
It's one out of the number of items.
It's like 1 out of a trillion or something.
That takes care of that whole, again, like I want to go through this game again, but I don't want to have like the exact same experience. You know what I mean? Like, so how do I, to me, we can refresh discovery.
It applies to the insights and stuff too,
exactly.
Right? So even the progression ladder that you normally go through is it's all scrambled up.
Yeah, we continue going deeper, right? Deeper and deeper.
So we also scrambled gems. So we added a fuckload of new sort of like gem potential locations to the map. And when you start your scramble save, then we iterate through every gem and we flip a coin as to whether or not that gem will remain in its normal spot or jump to some new scrambly location. So in scramble mode, you'll go to where you remember the gems being. Sometimes they'll be there. Sometimes they're not. And sometimes you'll be walking into a place and then there's a gem where there normally wouldn't be a gem. So you don't even know. So this is kind of like you have to re-explore the map. You can't assume anything about these gems, right? And we also scrambled. And this was the hard part. We scrambled the pets. Okay. So the way pets work in Crashlands 2 is each egg comes at a specific point in the game. So you typically you'll find the Slugabun egg first. And then, for example, there's a Trunkle egg that is accessible once you're 2/3 of the way through Marla's mantle, and you can't get it before that and whatever. So like there's basically like a I don't know progression percentage to the game.
It's sort of like they'll have particular placements, so you can't just like you can't just go like fight Fantas or something and get a Fanta egg. Which is how it works. So it's like you'll get them somehow, but it's always a surprise exactly how you'll get them.
And the eggs, so we was talking about how like a lot of things in Crashlands 2 are integration challenges. So the eggs have this thing where they have these hatching requirements, and you need certain base building items to create the conditions to get the egg to hatch. So if, for example, we just fully scrambled the eggs, so you suddenly get like a late game egg at the beginning of the game, if that egg requires the stuff that it normally would, well, you can't hatch it now because
you don't got those pieces.
You don't have any of those items. And then even worse is that the pets have these life lessons, which are quests that you go on with the pet following you in order to help it grow. And then once you've completed all its life lessons, you can embiggen that pet. Well, the life lessons, just like the hatching requirements, are connected to the point in the game at which you would normally get that pet. So you find a Slugabun, and the Slugabun has life lessons that are from that area, from the area, from the early like Marla's Mantle. If you ended up getting a Bumbleboar, which is a pet you can get at the beginning of Act 2, if you ended up getting that at the beginning of the game, but we kept its life lessons the same,
you wouldn't be able to embiggen it.
You wouldn't be able to embiggen it because you can't do any of those quests because you haven't gotten to Act 2 yet. Mm-hmm. So what did we do? All right. So first off, in scramble mode, when you find an egg, it's called a scrambled egg because we don't know what's in it. I mean, we know what's in it, but you don't know what's in it.
Well, the game knows what's in it. We don't know what's in it.
The game knows. Yeah, the game knows what's in it. So the egg is disguised. So all of the eggs in Marla's Mantle, they're just kind of like a greenish blue generic egg. And they're color coded so that you know what nest to put them on, basically. But anything could be in that egg.
You get, yeah.
Like you found the egg in Marla's Mantle, so you find the Slugabun egg in the normal spot, but it's now a scrambled egg. And when you look at it, its hatching requirements no longer they're still the same, but they no longer say anything about Slugabuns. It's just about like, oh, the egg responds to this, or like the egg prefers to be a small room.
Genericized those hatching requirements, so that there's no information.
It's species neutral. There's no clues, about what's coming out, and also because like. So then once you hatch the egg, so you'll use the hatching requirements that are normally associated with the egg that you get at that point in the game, but then something else comes out. So you might get a Wurgle out of that first egg, or a Yola, or whatever, right? You could get an end game pet or an early game pet, like we don't know. But again, we have the problem of, well, if you get that pet early game, but it's a late game pet, how do you embiggen it? Well, so we also swapped their life lessons. So let's say you get a Wurgle, which is like a mid Act 2 pet, as your first pet, as where you would normally get a Slugabun. So you would still take that Wurgle to do the life lessons that the Slugabun would normally do, but the quests have all been rewritten in scramble mode to be unopinionated about the species of the pet.
Yeah.
So that with that, then, you don't know what's going to be in any egg. You don't know what gadgets you're going to get. You don't know what trinkets you're going to get. You don't know where the gems are. And the system is scalable, right? So like if we add more gadgets, add more pets or whatever, then those things go into the scramble pool as well. And so we were laughing because like our goal is to add some more pets for patch 1.2 before we get the patch out. And that means there's going to be some pets that people have never seen before.
Yeah.
And if you get this patch and you're like, oh, scramble mode, and you start a new save, the first egg you hatch might actually be one of the new pets that you've never seen before. So this has been pretty fucking cool.
It's a fun one. It's a fun
because now as developers, like we can play through the game. Even though we built everything, we don't know what's coming.
Which is as close to that like that roguelike experience as a giant story-driven game like this can get without sort of stripping everything out, right? We're basically trying to ask the question like, how do you leverage? Because like the reality is like getting through the world's cool. We don't want to lose that. The quests are all great. Like we don't lose that. But what would you be able to take and like remix in some way without, again, like rebuilding the whole fucking planet that we built, right? And
it gives us the randomness without the procedural terrain generation, right? Because basically in the first game, everything was random in terms of where it was, but your sequencing through the game was fixed.
Yes.
So like you would always get the same gadgets and trinkets and stuff around the same time. And so the only question was just, and it wasn't even where is it, because everything just pops out at random, right? and sometimes you get a quest that would direct you to a place. And so you would like walk a different direction to get to that place than you would in a previous save. But
usually
still
not very
get,
much,
like,
actually.
still,
Most things weren't completely random. Most things had gently randomized, like sort of squiggled positioning, right? Where they could be like a little over here, a little over there. And a few things could be like anywhere on like a ring, for example. So it's like the always equidistant from the center, but like could be anywhere. But we, like with Crashlands 1, because there aren't any consistent landmarks and that kind of stuff.
You couldn't explore, actually.
Yeah, we couldn't. Yeah, you couldn't just explore the whole world to find stuff. So we actually were constrained on how randomly placed.
And importantly, we also, in the original game, we had to lock. We locked almost every place that we made that was for the quest, for the story, like all the outposts. The vast majority of them are not the sort that you can just wander into and then start doing the quest associated with. If you get there early, doors locked or people won't talk to you but the likelihood of you getting there early is so low because you can't find anything.
Because you can go any direction.
That like it didn't end up being too much of
which is where like I think the one that's like in a fixed location that we never pointed players to was Uggy's Meadow, which is the start of the Baconweed Fairy quest. It always starts like just a couple screens southeast of where the escape pod is. And still, most players don't find it until they see a guide and they're like, oh, and then because you have to like walk in that direction and it's a top-down game, you can't see it in the distance. Like you got to be next to it, right? Yeah,
and you can walk, any of the other not 270 degrees away from your ship to do your exploration, right? And so it's like,
so the other kind of cool thing with the scramble mode then is, and this is kind of like an ongoing issue that we're working on finding ways to continue to improve this, which is that if we add stuff to Crashlands 2 and you're at the end of the game, and let's say like in patch 1.3, we add a couple of bosses or something, right? That are like earlier in the game as part of side quests or something. Well, you're way past that now, and you won't get to experience those storylines or those bosses or whatever in the way that they would be intended to be experienced, because you would just come back in your late game gear and just kind of thrash them or whatever. So if we add stuff to the game now, it's kind of a hard sell, right? Unless there's a way to re-experience the game without having to see everything exactly the same as it was the first time you played through it, right? And so that's where scramble mode comes in, where it's like, you can just flip a switch and suddenly you just have no fucking idea what's coming, right?
Yeah, I love it. It's been fun to poke around with, and I think especially with any roguelike, like, the start of any of those runs for any roguelike is always very exciting. Your first couple of items, like seeing if there's any synergies that automatically pop in or whatever else, is just super fun. And then when you mix it with hardcore, that's where you get that. It's like the whole thing is tense because you're trying to not to fucking die, but also you don't even know what you're going to get. It's like a whole other little, experience in there, which I think is really cool. And I do want to talk a bit about the genesis of it, because like we saw this mod in Baldur's Gate that was mentioned as like one of the popular mods. Which like to me, I hadn't, I think I modded mine a little bit, but like not a lot. So I never actually saw this one when I was doing it, but I was reading some stuff about it. And basically what they did is a similar thing where this modder took all of the items that you find out in the world or they're given from quests or stuff like that, and basically just did the same thing, like scrambled it. And it ends up being one of the most popular mods, when you mix it in with other stuff, because again, it's like you want to play through the game. In the case of Baldur's Gate 3, like, you have different choices to be making, but it is kind of like hampered by the fact that if you know exactly where to get like the best gear for your monk or whatever the fuck this run, and you're just kind of beelining toward that stuff, it kind of like, it ruins some of the, just like the fun of figuring shit out and like making those on the fly changes to your plans and actually doing some exploration, right?
Yeah, there's no discovery, right? There's
no discovery. Exactly. Yeah. So we saw that and we were like,
it's a different kind of mastery, right? Because like if you're playing through a static thing, then the mastery is about knowledge.
Yes.
But like specifically like location and acquisition knowledge.
Yeah, which is fun, right? You could have a good time doing that.
Oh yeah.
Right? Yeah. And you can create an optimal path. And you're like, well, I know that like this vendor down in the Underdark sells this acid damage ring. And so like, I'm going to get down there as quick as possible once I get 1,400 gold or whatever. Right. And so there's all these little things that you can kind of figure out and like master a path. And people do that like on honor mode, which is the hardcore mode in Baldur's Gate. But then, with the scramble, then it's still, you're like, well, I know that vendor has something.
Yeah.
I know the vendor has something. Like normally it's this acid ring. But since things are scrambled, like they might actually have something even better, or they might have a piece of shit. I don't know, but I still got. I'm going to get down there and see. But I don't necessarily need to like urgently go down there now. Like I don't need to go in the normal sort of quote optimal path.
It removes that like planned or like that dominant strategy problem from the equation, right? Which is like once you know exactly how to play a thing, then you can kind of optimize the fun out of it. But if the rewards associated with that and a lot of the ways you power up become completely strange. So, the eggs are scrambled. So you're getting random pet, you're getting like totally random gadgets, you're fishing up stuff out of the water that shouldn't be in the fucking water. Like a bunch of weird stuff's happening.
But it's fun though, because it still lets you like leverage that knowledge though, because like you don't know what's going to be there, but something's going to be there. Right. And so it gives you that good middle ground of like, you get to still feel like, ooh, I get to take advantage of having played this a bunch of times. I know where stuff is. I can go find stuff. And I know how things relate to each other, so I know where.
Or even like what good combos are, like it's not like you're getting random items, like totally random items. If you know what the items are, if you're like, oh, cool, I got this piece. I hope I get this other piece. And then it shows up. You're like, fuck yeah. There's that whole like building your set is still there and all that stuff. And so I think it feels like a really good way for us to marry a bunch of those things together with how the game actually works and what, we're always trying to think about like, what are we providing in any one of these updates for players who have already beaten the game as an invitation for them to come back, as well as ways that we're improving it for any like brand new player, right? And so
we don't want to just have like, hey, we just added a post game. So like if you've beaten the game, then here's a bunch of stuff to do after you've beaten the game, because not everybody has beaten the game, right? Mm-hmm. And also like if you're halfway through the game and it's like, hey, here's all this cool new content, go ahead and play for another 20 or 30 hours, get to the end, and then here's the new content. So it's always trying to add stuff that like universally affects the whole game, that boosts replay, that like adds content throughout. Mm-hmm. And I think we also talked in the past about the problem of bosses and how like people are asking for more bosses and we want more bosses, but
we want to do them better than we did the first time, They didn't. Yeah. They were completely one and done in Crashlands 1.
And in Crashlands 2, right? Like you beat the bosses. And so like, if it takes us like 2 weeks to make a boss and then you like that boss is 3-minute boss fight, then the leverage is terrible. Yeah. Like from a cost benefit standpoint, in terms of how much dev time goes into how much player experience. So it's like before we add all the bosses, we should like add a bunch more bosses. We should rethink how bosses work and try to come up with a better way so that it's just universally a cool new thing to engage with in the game, and you can do it in a bunch of different ways, or it has some other benefits as well. There's a lot of stuff we got to figure out with that, but so like patch 1.2, so our plan then is. So we already have the scramble mode. Mm-hmm. I started working on it like as soon as we hit publish on patch 1.1, and it's all in there. Hardcore mode is underway. It's functioning at the most basic level, and then we still have a bunch more features to add to it.
Then we got a lot of content to do. So
we got a lot of new content we're working on. We're not gonna commit hard to what exactly that content's gonna be, because we're working on a bunch of it, but in terms of timelines, we're not sure exactly what'll fit in. What subset of it will fit in the time, but there'll still be a healthy amount of new things. So you guys had more you want to say about Scramble Hardcore? Fucking stoked, and I'm also interested to hear what our players have to say about it. Now that we've bloviated about it for a little bit. All right, let's get into a question.
Let's do it.
From our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net, our highest upvoted question comes from Jumpylumpa Leapylow, who says, there's also Degeki, who says, what do your programming notes look like? Are they strictly functional and informational, or do you sprinkle in some of your trademark studio humor?
What's a programming note?
I assume you're talking about like comments or documentation, that kind of stuff, probably.
Yeah, so I don't really do comments much these days.
That's true. It's hard for me to navigate some of this code because I'm like, I have to read every line to figure out what it's doing, because there's no like, here's what I'm doing, kind of a header. So.
Yeah. But importantly, you're able to figure out what it's doing by reading the code.
I can figure it out though.
Which is kind of the key, because like I used to leave lots of comments, but the comments were usually things like, how the fuck do I get this thing to be like this? And there was one point where we released the source code for, I want to say Flop Rocket, as part of like a Game Maker bundle, and we got in trouble because I had a lot of comments that had a lot of profanity in it. Which, it's just stuff like I would just be like thinking through a problem and be like, some bullshit's going on with this array that I got to figure out, and then I would just never delete the comments. So the comments were both non-helpful. It was like stream of consciousness coding, right? There was non-helpful, non-informative, and they didn't even do anything for me. It was just me kind of like getting my thoughts out, but not in a structured
journal.
way.
You had your swearing journal alongside your code, and they were just enmeshed, back in the day.
Yeah. And then there was a time where I kind of switched over to doing a lot more sort of pseudocode kind of comments to sort of like pre-think through stuff, which I stopped doing once I started using Copilot, because Copilot wouldn't shut the fuck up and try to complete my comments for me. And it would just announce what it thought I was going for, and it was wrong. And then I just stopped doing that. And so Copilot has actually just like fully kicked me out of commenting my code.
Well, so you could, because you can also just highlight stuff and then be like, Copilot, what the fuck is what's going on here? And it will give you a summary.
That's true. Yeah. It can do that. But the problem with that is you have to have Copilot turned on,
Yeah. Well, I'm saying like as far as
the summary has to be correct because it, isn't necessarily.
Yeah.
But it's pretty good on the summary side, right?
It's pretty good if depending on language and how much context it has. So basically, if you've written really good code that already is understandable, and has a lot of context around it,
that's human readable.
That Copilot will do a really good job of telling you what you could have found out yourself, right?
Yes.
Which is basically like, this is why I don't use AI tools for summarizing things, because I'm like, if it has everything it needs to do a good job, then so do I. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't. And I don't know if it does until
you won't know until you've read it.
Yeah. So there's just no reason to have AI summarize anything unless you don't care if it's correct or if you lose information in the process.
Which does remind me of a statistic I saw this week that apparently ChatGPT now has more monthly visitors than Wikipedia.
Yeah,
so that's interesting.
Yeah. But also OpenAI announces all kinds of stuff that I'm very
No, this wasn't from OpenAI. This was from independent
third-party
analysts. Yeah. But so the other problem with comments is it's comments are a form of documentation.
Are they though? That's the problem. You know what I mean?
They can be.
Yeah.
But basically, when I say document, I'm using this term very loosely, which is it's some text that isn't the code, but that's about the code.
Yeah.
Right?
Probably.
It could be. Anyway.
Ideally.
Because it could be, because you could just write a fucking like haiku just in the middle of your code for no reason, right? Or just express how frustrated you are about what's going on in the code without actually talking about the code.
But the problem with comments is also the problem with documentation, which is the decoupling problem.
It gets rusty,
Yeah. If you have documentation and you have code, or if you have comments and you have code, if the code changes, you have to also remember to change the reference material that's talking about it. And if you forget to do that, then the documentation is misleading, right? Because like the code is the source of truth. So this is why I was trying to focus on just making the code human readable, using descriptive variable names, very descriptive function names, try to keep things neat and concise, but like verbose enough that they're understandable and concise enough that they're not, unwieldy, right? It's like somewhere in the middle there. But if you have a variable that's just like A, and that variable represents some abstract concept that you could have described in like 4 words, but you're like, I'm not going to make a variable name that's 4 words long. Then only you at this moment in time know what that variable means, because you'll look back on that in 2 months and be like, what the fuck is this, right? Or somebody else looks at it, they won't know what it is. So you're not really saving yourself time by having like these clever, cute little teeny tiny variable names. You'll have to write comments, you have to maintain more documentation. So just try to focus on clean code, human readable functions, human readable. And one of my favorite moves is, so like sometimes if you're a programmer, you've seen sort of like the convoluted conditional, where you'll have like a bunch of ors and ands and groups and stuff like that. When if you're checking whether something is true, and as you're piecing it together, eventually it makes sense and it works. but it's just kind of like a logic clusterfuck.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's very hard to think about.
Yeah, it's like a big
and the problem is
problem, right?
Yeah, well, because the problem with those two is that when you're coming into one, you don't know what it's trying to do first. So if you know what it's trying to do, then as you're like reading it, you're like piecing together like, oh, I see why you did this and then that because to get that goal, right? So if you don't have that,
but if it's just there, you're like,
then you're trying to figure out what it's even for while trying to evaluate it, and it's a logic puzzle, right? That gets
yeah. So don't make puzzles. Right. Mm-hmm. So how do you do that? Well, for example, like let's say you have something that's like if, A or B as a group and not C. Mm-hmm. Right. So you look at that, you're like, I'm not saying not C, but like not mm-hmm. C.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So you're looking at that. It's like, okay, so as a reader, you got to figure out why they would be grouped that way. Why would you be checking A or B? And how come C shouldn't be true? So
yeah, because even if the Boolean is correct, if you're not sure what it's trying to accomplish, then you can't even tell.
Then you can't evaluate it.
Yeah, you can't tell.
Yeah. So whenever I find myself making these more complex logic structures, I actually break them apart into phrases. So the group A or B is asking something in particular. So I'll make a new variable, and maybe that's like Steve went to buy gas equals A or B, right?
So you're providing you're providing a why and a what for via
of what it represents.
Yeah, because people are hesitant to do it because they're like, you can already tell that that's A or B, so you can already see what it's doing. It's like, but you don't know why it's doing that.
Why are we asking about it? What is it supposed to represent? Because the simple thing about these kinds of conditionals is at the end of the day, it's all true or false. Mm-hmm. So they're all very simple questions, right? Like if A or B are true, then that means something. And if it's not true, that means the opposite, right? And so if you can take that grouping of conditionals and represent it in a human readable phrase, then you take that variable, that new variable that you can actually read, throw that into the if statement instead of A or B. And suddenly it's very easy to understand what the
code also makes it way less likely that you do that very common error when coding, which is basically because you're working with variables that are a letter or two, just like fucking one of them up, right? Like missing, you're like, oh, I accidentally called it, said A instead of B at this point. And it's like, if it was, Steve go gets gas or whatever the fuck, like it's a long thing. You don't do that.
And if you need to like reevaluate that same thing at multiple points, then now you've got it all rolled up into one variable.
It's just easier to read.
And you don't need to keep copy pasting the same conditional over and over again, it's really just all about, it's like if you find yourself writing lots of comments to make your code understandable, fix your fucking code,
but for this general question of like, when we do have them in there, are they fun, right? Because that's really what the question is about, right? Is like when we do document stuff, whether it's a variable name, whether it's a comment, whether it's a function explanation or like an example code or whatever, right? Like, is it fun? For me, they used to be fun, but the problem with fun stuff is that it's now disconnected from the purpose, right? Because if you have a variable name, because you want it to be concise, so it's easy to type and easy to read and understand, so you can tell what's going on. So if you need a variable that's like Steve has gas, right? Then if you try to make it funny, like Steve is gassy or like some other kind of a thing, then now there's this extra layer of work you have to do when you're evaluating it to be like, okay, wait, I got to get past the joke to make sure I know what this is actually meaning. And now there's uncertainty all of a sudden in what stuff means. So I've personally found that my earlier days of coding, I'd be telling jokes in my comments and like having a great time, like naming stuff. And I'd be very cute about my function names.
But of course, the jokes are only for you because nobody else is really reading. Code.
But especially as code grows, because now if you're like, oh, I need to find that file. You're like, oh yeah, I have the function that does blah. But now you're like, what is the joke that I used, right, to do it? Instead of just being able to be like, oh, I need a function that like concatenates two strings.
I think that's true.
Search concats two strings, and you're like, oh, I found it because it's named exactly what it should be, right? Yeah. Versus, so I do think like in code, like in good code, especially large code bases, you're gonna find like it's part of why programming seems so serious, because like for it to be practical and useful and maintainable and all that kind of stuff and easy to type and understand, it has to get right to the meaning. Just like zero in on it, but not just in that moment, but in a way that is predictable so that
it's a clarity problem.
Yeah, because you got to be able to find stuff too. When you're in a big code base, you got to be able to find it. So yeah, personally, so when I'm like in my like descriptions of like a function, for example, I'll be more casual in my language use because it's prose, and I'm not like telling jokes, but I'm not purposely trying to be business-like, Yeah. I'm being direct, but I'll still throw casual language in as I'm doing stuff and all that. I just write like I'm a person, right? But the other thing about those things too is that all of those, if you have a good code editor, are actually functional, right? Because those, like a comment describing a function shows up when you hover over the function name with your mouse, right? And so if that is really long and not very dense in terms of its information content, then it takes up space and you have to read a lot to figure out what the hell it's doing. But
so you just start tripping over yourself,
Yeah. And so I think a lot of this is like when you're trying to maximally use the tools and how the tools work, it ultimately comes down to like how concise and sort of front loaded and predictable can you make all the information so that at the moment you need something, it's right there. The moment you need to find something, you can find it, right? And unfortunately, there's a creative process involved with that because you got to think carefully about how to do it. But it's not creativity that leads to fun stuff. It's creativity that leads to very utilitarian stuff.
Yeah, I think even on the art side, we do with how evolved everything's gotten with Crashlands 2, for example, like the pipeline and getting, like when I brought Ann up to speed on how to do work in Spine or how to do basically just move an asset from making it in Clip Studio all the way into the game. We put together a lot of documentation actually for that. And similarly, it's like there's not much humor in it because it's just so you're trying to just be very clear about how to do a fucking thing, right?
Yep.
And I think a big reason for that too is there's a time and place for humor, and the time and place is when everything is fine.
Yep.
When things are not going fine, you really are in the mood for jokes, right? So imagine you're going back through some code because there's some kind of a game-breaking issue that's fucking up the experience for half of your players, and you need to get an emergency patch out. And now you're wading through a bunch of jokes that you told in your code, trying to figure out what the code is doing. You're not having a very good time.
That is when I find myself like I think that literal exact experience is the thing that like fully eventually kicked me out of behaving like this at all, because I've had those moments where I'd be like, what the fuck is this? Right? I can't figure out what this is doing. And then I would be like angrily like rewriting the code as I went while I'm trying to find some other code. I'm trying to figure out like what is going on, but I can't even get there because it takes so much
past gesture mental effort. Being a ding dong. Yeah.
Which isn't just about telling jokes. It's also just about doing a bad job, right? Those are
but it is the case. Like if you're in a bad mood, jokes it's like a coin toss as to whether they help or make it worse.
I think if you're the one telling the joke, it helps. I think, you know what I mean? Like if you're,
in the moment.
Yeah, if you're in if you're in some distress, like in a hospital setting or something like that, like humor's
you can break the tension.
People are funny as fuck. But like you are funny.
Like and we kind of talked a while back on the podcast about how like sometimes you'll see a player review for Crashlands 2 or even the original Crashlands or any of our games really, and you can see that the person is just genuinely mad, and they're mad about somehow everything. But anytime you have a review that is overtly angry, they always talk about how they're pissed off about the fact that there's jokes in the game.
Yeah,
that's true. Always, right? True. And it's because like that person came into the game looking for something to hate,
Or
and
they as soon found as they something they hated. But either way, they were now in just like an I hate this mode.
Yeah, and so like seeing if they're already having a bad experience and then like they see the game not taking itself seriously and like making jokes or something, then it just like pushes them further into a rage, so like don't do that to yourself in your own work, and whether it's like art pipelines or code or whatever your documentation is.
I do want to mention something on the art side with comments, which is this tricky bit that I think happens to just to artists generally who don't actually have like a really structured process, right? Which is like, because you think about comments on code are just trying to be able to be like, what is this for, right? Like you said, not even necessarily not just what is it doing, but what is this for?
Well, and code is already text, so there's a natural place to put comments in code,
Yeah, and so when you're looking at art stuff, you have this other problem, which is everything gets kind of smushed together, right? So if I have a layer, right, which is typically how digital artists work, I have a layer, and it's just got like a few little fucking green blobs on it, Okay.
Yeah. What is that?
What is that? What is that for? What are we trying to do here? And so you could take a couple of different approaches with that. But what's interesting to me is like none of the tools actually help with this at all. So like the best you can do is rename a layer in something like Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint. But there's not metadata attached to that layer, just sort of by virtue of working, that will save you anything in the future. So when I was making the terrain sets for Crashlands 2, one of the big things was I got a brush set that's just got a bunch of different kinds of brushes. And this is very common for digital artists. You'll oftentimes have just like you have like 1,000 fucking brushes, right? They all work slightly differently. They blend differently. They got different kind of textures to them, whatever. All meant to emulate different kinds of materials, right? Or something. So when I was making these, the tiles for Crashlands 2, that's what I was using to get these like dirty textures, to get them like beach sand, whatever. And one of the issues I immediately ran into was just like, if I wanted to make a tweak to something, was just, a day or two later, what fucking brush did I use on this particular layer? Like on this to make this effect here? Because it's not, that information is not anywhere. So if you don't remember it, if you don't look at it and instantly recognize it, which requires that you're only using like a handful of brushes and they're all stored properly, whatever, then you literally can't tell, right? And so there's like a whole other layer of this, like, how do you, on a meta level, save yourself from tripping over everything, even on the art side, where it seems like because it's visual, it'd be easier, but it's actually even harder, if that makes sense, because it's hidden.
Yeah. Well, I think we have this. Yeah. Again, this just drives me crazy, and all kinds of sort of, I'm just gonna say documents as like a really generic term. So it would include like a art asset or whatever, right? But once you get outside of code, because code also is good because you can have things be dynamic, right? So instead of being like, I had used a brush, now I see the output of the brush, but the input is gone. What's in the code is the function call that causes that output, right? So you always basically have like the full path to whatever the output was always there. The moment you get out of a computer program, they don't have it. You've got whatever the current state is and maybe a history of the states that you've been in, right? So you've got what the art asset looked like yesterday or the day before or whatever, right? You might have an undo stack where you can like undo a bunch of stuff that happened to the art recently, right? But what you don't have is, first I selected this and then I hit the delete key and then I chose this brush and then I applied it here, right? You don't.
So you're saying like code is a descriptive logical sequence of what is happening.
Correct, exactly.
And art is just here's the ending.
Yeah, and that's true for also everything else, right? Because I find this too, and I'm like, I'll go to an old document about something, right? Google Doc or whatever, and there's a history. There's a history that I could go back to if I want to be like, okay, I don't have a history of like, oh, I changed this because that. I just have this and that, and I can try to like guess.
You try and
why did this change happen?
Why did this change?
Because there's also no like, because like in code we use stuff like Git. So we make some changes and then we
document the change.
And we document the intent behind this collection of changes, and then we send that off.
Yeah, so this concept of sort of documented batch changes, or just because you can't you don't want to document every single pixel change if you're dealing with art, right? No, it's noise. It's noise. You can't do it. But being able to get through a sequence of things, and then when you save it, make a note at that time, so that now there's like a history of like named save states that at least can convey something, right? So there are ways that this could be done for any kind of a file type, at least at that level, not necessarily capturing the whole process, but being able to annotate the process.
Yeah, that's basically what you end up doing on the art side, right? Which is like,
but if it doesn't provide you the tools to do it, then that means you have to go. That means you now need a decoupled system where you save a new. There's like your whole the joke about you've got a final v4.docx file or whatever, right?
Yeah,
because the file name ends up being your system to do it, which
you
is
just keep saving new versions.
Yeah, which is not particularly useful, right? And because we see this with stuff with our localization pipeline and stuff too, right? Where it's like a change will have been made to a string, and I know once we get a hold of the string to get ready to send it off to loc, I know that it's been changed, but I don't know why. That's not captured in our pipeline for how we get there, right? And so then and also that means loc doesn't know why it's changed, right? And so what they can see it is before and after. They have to make guesses about why it changed and then decide if they need to, update the translation accordingly, right? And this problem exists in absolutely every domain.
Oh, it's just everywhere. I think where there's in the art stuff, the stuff that drives me crazy is a place where it feels like it would be easy to get some additional metadata that would even be actionable. Yep. Like what colors were used on this layer already, right? I don't know. That'd be fucking great if I could just see those and then click on one and get it, as opposed to being let me eyedropper it with my mouse by targeting the layer and all this stuff. There's all these things where I I think process-wise, it makes it more challenging to have any kind of documentation whatsoever. But I think generally it's true that over time, the overall kind of like the jokey mirthfulness of like the technical aspects of our work have just evaporated. You know, like,
the technical stuff. The technical stuff is what allows us to make jokes outwardly to the people enjoying the outcome of it.
Yes.
You know, like being able to have dumb jokes on tooltips and in dialogue, and like have things look goofy that Sam made. You know, like the slug of my eyes pointing in different directions. You know, like the joke is now in the output, not.
Yeah, or if you're
in the process,
if you're writing tutorials as like documentation for a code project, where like you've got because there's like the raw docs, which is like the stuff that's in the code that's concise, that's used by your tools and all that kind of stuff, right? But then there's that next layer up where it's like, okay, here's some code examples, here's my README file that describes what this is for and all of that. And for me, those are absolutely places to actually have a good time, you know, writing, and to
for other
be a person. People. Well, yeah. Well, and it's for you as a person interacting with another person as a person, and it's better if that stuff is personal and so
light.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where we're at with it. You know, keep things professional on the inside and fun on the outside.
Yep.
And that's all the time we have for this episode. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate to support the podcast, and links to the archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam, give Crashlands 2 a wish list or a buy. You know, we got the Tinkerlands bundle coming up there as well. So if you, wait one more day after this episode, you can get both games. So that's pretty cool. Or head on over to the App Store or Google Play and pick up the game over there as well. And we appreciate it. So thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye.